Well, today I'm asking you to come and watch this show with an open mind. Lately, there's been quite a bit of attention paid to Alex Jones for accurately predicting major world events like the 9/11 terrorist attacks on the World Trade Center and the COVID pandemic. Watch this.
Middle of September, that the new policy's being written, you will all have to wear masks again, and so will airport employees.
It's happening. Mask mandates are officially back.
We know the Joint Chiefs of Staff wanted to blow up airliners, Baltimore Sun, or if you let some terrorist group do it, like the World Trade Center, we know who to blame. And if there was an outside threat like a bin Laden, who was a known CIA asset in the 80s,
this group and its leader, a person named Osama bin Laden,
he's the boogeyman they need.
We're looking at a giant war in February right now. I predict the Russians are going to roll in. They're already there. They're going to roll in.
With attacks across Ukraine, which is the size of Texas.
It really was the Iraqis. That's just because they're getting ready to invade Iraq.
And of course, those predictions beforehand were slammed and shamed by the mainstream media. Of course, he was right. He was 100% correct in those. But guess what? Someone else who's been accurately predicting major world events for the last few decades has been shamed and has been targeted with death threats. In fact, 25 documented attempts on his life by certain world governments and other third parties because he's been 100% accurate with his predictions. We're going to highlight a few of his amazing predictions on today's show. This man's name is Billy Meier. He doesn't speak English. In fact, he lives in Switzerland. And he claims that since the age of 6 years old, he's been the subject of alien contact. And he's 80 years old now. I mean, he's 86 years old now. This has been happening to him for 80 years. And they bring him information. They bring him warnings, warning humanity about what's to come. He's been documenting this, telling his family at the time, and then writing them down. And sadly, the CIA and other intelligence agencies have tried to discredit him over the years, tried to kill him multiple times, as we pointed out here. And on today's show, we are going to look at his past predictions, the ones that have come true with unbelievable specificity. And we're going to look at his upcoming predictions, the ones that he's predicting for 2024 and beyond. We're going to look deeply at those over the next few years, and we hope that humanity pays attention to these. Again, I ask you to watch this next interview here with an open mind. Joining me is Michael Horn. Michael is the United States English language representative for Billy Meier. He knows Billy very well, and he does an amazing job of trying to get Billy's message out to the world, and he writes about it on his website. You can read all of this. You can read all of the documentation, the copyrighted dates, the publication dates of everything that we're about to talk about. You can read it at his website, theyflyblog.com. We'll have it linked up below. And I want to welcome Michael back to the show. Michael and I have done a couple of deep dive interviews here that now have millions of views, and people around the world said they couldn't believe they never heard about Billy Meier before. And I'm thankful to have you back on the show, Michael. We're going to do some really interesting stuff today.
Hi, Clayton. Thank you very much for having me back. Quite an opportunity was extended to me a year ago or so. Two shows that we did, widely viewed, and yours is the only, and if you don't mind my calling you a mainstream platform because of your viewership, yours is the only platform that has allowed this material to go public, and certainly to this degree. So I thank you for that, and very, very glad to be back and
it's my pleasure.
Point of view.
Well, I mean, look, this is fascinating information. It's unbelievable. You've devoted your life to it. And so has Billy Meier has devoted his life to it. And we're putting it out there for the world to go through the documents, read it themselves, understand what's being said and presented. And if you want to remain skeptical, please remain skeptical. If you want to dive more deeply into it, then dive more deeply into it. And I think you'll be stunned, and I think you'll be fascinated. The reason I wanted to do today's show is we're going to look back at past predictions from Billy Meier that have come true. And you have, I mean, there's hundreds. We're just going to go through like 5 today, okay? And then I want to look forward. Mostly I want to look forward at predictions that haven't happened, predictions he's made but haven't happened yet. And what he's predicting for 2024 and beyond, because I think we can do something about it. That's the important stuff for us to make a change. What can we do about it? And so I want to spend quite a bit of time going through that today. So again, we'll pick about 5 or 6 things that have come to pass. We'll go into those things, fascinating stuff like the Kennedys and unbelievable stuff. And then we're also going to look to the future. But before we do, I would love for you just to give our audience a little bit of a deeper understanding of who Billy Meier is and his contact story and why so many death threats against the guy. Can you go into who is Billy Meier?
Yes, I can. Billy Meier is a now 86-year-old Swiss man. He speaks a little English, but he no longer does interviews, so that's what I volunteered to do. He began, according to him, his contacts with an extraterrestrial man, 1942, when he was 5 years old, actually. His is the most documented life I know of. We have photographs going back to the age of 5 and all the way along the way. Somebody knew at that time, in 1942 in Switzerland, that it was going to be important to get photographic and other documentation on this man, who is today and has been since then the only actual extraterrestrial contactee, the only person with actual evidence, independently authenticated, analyzed and authenticated, of extraterrestrial manufacture. None of the hearings, none of the people making claims today have that. Only fuzzy videos and this and that. This is the hard evidence. 1,200 plus photos in this period of time from about 1964 onward to 1981, over 1,200 photos, 8 films, a video in which he appears while he is in broad daylight videotaping a UFO hovering at a tree, and he zooms in. It's just the most amazing documentation. People can't handle it. Say it's too good to be true. It had to be a fake. But as you know, the late astronaut Gordon Cooper says, in 35 seconds, these photos are authentic. They're fine, very fine. He's meeting with extraterrestrials, and I don't know why anybody calls this man a hoaxer. It's the real thing. And it goes on and on. So he's somebody who, going back quite a way, has had an extraordinary life. Probably what I never shared with you before is that in the late 50s, early 60s, he was known as the Phantom in the Middle East. He was hired by police departments in West Pakistan, Turkey, and India to bring in serial killers and mass murderers. As a teenage boy, he'd run away from some juvenile detention thing to join the French Foreign Legion. He learns how to do all sorts of things that they teach. He decides, I don't want to be a killer, but he comes away with great skills. He had nerves of steel. It's like Lawrence of Arabia meets Luke Skywalker meets Indiana Jones. And people think, some gray-bearded guy sitting in Switzerland. There have been 25 attempts on his life, as you say. There are 120 eyewitnesses. I am one of them. I've been within 20 feet. I've had 3 sightings of their craft. One was within 20 feet of them. That I consider still anecdotal. The hard evidence, the UFO photos, films, independently authenticated. Nobody has it. Nobody. But this is a higher standard of proof. And I was going to bring forward, I had 4 pages that I quickly ran off to bring for today, but I understand, let's deal with 5 or 6, whatever you want to do. And really, as you said, Clayton, it's up to people themselves. We're not here to create believers. We're not here to arm twist or convince. Determine the truth for yourself.
Yeah, exactly. So what we're going to do is go through some of these prophecies, these predictions. Now, he's met with these what he says are extraterrestrials, and they've warned him. They've given him warnings years in advance of certain events. So first, before we get into these events, why would they do that? Why would they tell him about these events, these major things? And I'm talking physical, like volcanoes and earthquakes, as well as human, assassinations and wars. So why would they tell him these things? What was the purpose when they presented him with this information?
All right, I'll answer that, but I'll add something to it. They not only told him, in many instances, they showed him. So how is that possible if you're talking of, we're talking about predictions and things that were made back as early as the 40s and 50s that have come true. Well, we have, to a scientific and legal standard of proof, not only shown, and we have this documentation, that this involves space travel, of course, the information about Mars and black holes and all that. But when you go back and you're talking about things published in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s that only occur in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, That was done through time travel, and we prove it to a legal standard. Having said that, we will leave that to people, but let's answer yes and proved. It's ironclad. And this is why when we watch these hearings, a year ago you had me on to talk about the hearings then that I turned over photographs to this committee from Representative Andre Carson. They censored the photos. The public never saw them. They should have. The same outcome is coming from these hearings. More chase your tail, because nice as they are, Representatives Luna and Tim Burchett, both of whom I've sent information to, never acknowledged we can prove we sent it. They're not a match for the CIA. It's a government in and of itself, and you're not going to get the truth from an organization that admits they've been lying for 70 years,
right.
And now they're telling you the truth. So
yeah.
Billy Meier is shown, and in some cases just conversationally informed about things. He doesn't have to see everything for himself. He publishes it. And they do it because they have these alleged extraterrestrial human beings who are called the Pleiadians, otherwise known in the fake UFO circles as Pleiadians. No such people exist. They feel a self-obligated mission to try to help us assure our own future survival. That goes back eons to when, according to the information of the case, their forefathers were among those who messed around a little bit with primitive Earth peoples at different epochs and misled people, represented themselves, as did other ETs, as the gods of our religions, and set things in motion that have caused a great deal of confusion and pain to humankind. Not the people that he's meeting with today, and he's met with them as recently as last week, but their forefathers, their ancestors. He's already published over 870 transcripts of these meetings with them, and there's others that have yet to be published, full of information, full of the warnings about what's coming, what can be avoided, and what probably can't. We're not here to scare people, but that's what the story is.
All right, so let's get into some of these details. I know people have been waiting for this. So let's talk about some of the verified, these are events that have happened in the past that he's written about. And these are published in books. Many of them were published in copywritten books before the event happened. Again, we'll have links. We'll put up on the screen book covers and links, and we'll also have links on your website if people want to go and look at the original documentation. They can. So all of this was published beforehand and written down and copywritten beforehand. So there's a lot of them, so it just depends on where they were printed. Some of them were printed in German beforehand, in German language and things like that. But we'll have the links.
And if
so go ahead.
I just want to throw this in. Some things, I mean, we have enough in books that it's legal standard approved. But some things you will actually be able to, and maybe have to in some cases, use the Wayback Machine online and find where we first published something, and then from Meier, and then it occurs. Because when this started to be published officially, 1975, officially disseminated in the world, they're running it off on what were called mimeograph machines at the time, and publishing in German, and then binding everything into these big blocks, these books. So all this stuff, the earliest stuff, has all been published from the get-go in German. The English language translations came subsequent. They started in about 1978. We have the books. People will be able to see this. And then if they have questions or challenges for proof, can you prove this one? Then they get in touch with me, and I see how well I can satisfy their thing. But when you have a preponderance of evidence, listen, if you have somebody that literally you can prove they published it 20 years ago, like the Alex Jones thing that you just showed.
Yeah, you show the video, show the publication. Yeah, and he speaks German, so German Swiss. So yeah, again, it's difficult in that regard, but it's printed in documentation in German language and English language now. And again, if anyone has a challenge on any of it, reach out to Michael through your website, and you will provide the documentation to confirm it if we don't show it here on the screen. So I just want to get that out of here. We're not looking to dupe anyone. I want to show documented stuff here, and I'm not trying to convince anyone. If you're a skeptic, fine, go be a skeptic. I just want you to, these are things have come to pass, and they were printed before the event. Okay, let's get into it. I want to start with Billy Meier predicted in 1953 the assassinations of the Kennedys. Can you elaborate on that? 1953, about 10 years beforehand.
Yes. So what happened is Meier claims, I'll just say it once, according to the information in the case, and everything will come forward from that and my claims that we have documentation. He started to publish his transcripts in the 70s, but he was also taking down the conversations and transcribing them earlier. He had a second teacher. His first teacher was this elderly man beginning in 1942. And then in about 1953, he's meeting with this woman, and she is giving him lots and lots of predictions of things to come. And that was, one of the highlights, both Kennedy brothers. She said, this one will be killed then and this one then. And so he transcribes it, and that's put into the block of information where the earliest transcripts in 75 after the events take place. So I don't mind if people say, oh, well, that's after the fact. Yeah, but there's things in there that occurred after the publication. And this is where the other element of proof is, that if you have a body of information, oh, well, you say it's, but this happened after that date. Read the rest of them.
Right.
Oh, yeah, those all happened after publication, and we have plenty of those. And that's where the rubber, meets the road, or whatever they say in these things. So that's the one I'm going to say. It's in there with a lot of other stuff. I have a clip of 5 different earthquake volcanic things that they were predicted with the location, the dates and everything 2 years beforehand. And we have that. So we've got enough of this, and we'll throw in things that people can certainly say it can't be so.
Right. All right. So assassination of Kennedy, he was told in 1953 that both brothers would be killed. They were then 10 years later. Let's talk about this. 44 specific error-free predictions regarding COVID and the vaccine dating back to 1947. So he was being told in 1947 about a pandemic to come and about COVID or a specific version of this. Can you talk about that one?
Right. I can. And I'm going to tell you right now that we have the documents online, the transcripts from 1947, 49, when young 10 and 12-year-old Edward Albert Meier is describing what's coming, all sorts of things, including the problems women would have, the toxicity from vaccines, but most importantly, for proof positive, February 23rd, 2020, I received a document. It had a dozen specific warnings. You see the document, dozen specific warnings about this coming pandemic. We are the first people in English to not theorize, but to publish the fact that this was to be a pandemic. It would effectively be spread by a lot of asymptomatic spreaders. Children would be the first hidden spreaders. The WHO would be, and China would be largely responsible, a bunch of things, and an interesting recommendation in there about the need for hermetically sealed environments. So people who look at that and read it, let me now explain. I published that documentation 2 days later. I read through it, and that was on February 25th, 2020, I believe. Everything in that document there, that's a dozen. There are over 40 more specific examples of the information, and Meier published it. We can prove all of that. And he published it before anybody else, CDC, WHO. For the trouble of sending this around through the state in which I live, Arizona, when there were 5 cases in the state on March 2nd, we had 0 coverage. We were told it would not be published, it would not be investigated, and now we have, 37,000 cases. Yeah, it goes.
So you published it, you published it on your website, this information coming from Meier saying that this was coming, and before anyone was talking about it. That's unbelievable. Okay, another one. Let's go into this. The Jupiter IO information. I'm fascinated about this. In 1978, can you explain the Voyager missions in 1978 or the Jupiter IO information in 1978? What is this about?
The Jupiter mission was in process in 78. It would end up taking some very important photographs in 1979 of and around Jupiter and its moons. it's somewhere around October, maybe 15th or 18th of 1978, Billy Meier publishes a transcript in one of those bound early published books. We have it, we've got the dates, and I'll be able to show everybody. He is discussing with an alleged extraterrestrial woman Jupiter and its moon Io. And he states, as I recall, Io, you told me, is the most volcanically active body in the solar system. And the ejecta from its volcanoes, that part of the ejecta that escapes the gravitational pull of that moon, is taken up into the torus around Jupiter. The rest of it falls down onto the moon, and it accounts for the unnaturally smooth surface of a moon and it goes on and on about this thing, and goes on to more information about Jupiter. Well, I believe, and I use that word because I want to make sure that, okay, I'm pretty sure March 12th, 1979, JPL NASA announces the single most important discovery of the Voyager mission, and that is that Io is the most volcanically active body in the solar system. How could Billy Meier in 1978, and this information is carried to the U.S., by the way, by Lieutenant Colonel Wendell Stevens. He reports, I've had this information in my possession since March 9th, 3 days before NASA makes the announcement.
Wow.
How could he know and describe a moon of a planet that he doesn't have nobody had a telescope to see that stuff.
Right.
It's just one. So how does he, and it turns out skeptics jumped on this to attack it, and they started posting articles about the Jupiter mission and all of this. And a year later, JPL NASA comes out with another finding, which corroborates the 1978 information. The skeptics inadvertently support and publish post-Meier information that corroborates it. This one thing alone. This is ironclad. We've got this.
Right.
And so I do get excited about that one.
Yeah, as a space junkie myself, I'm curious about that. Let's
That's
talk
just part
about.
of it.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned volcanoes a couple of times. Let's talk about this: the Icelandic volcano erupting. Of course, there's live streams right now over the past week that have been dedicated. They literally have cameras on the Icelandic volcanoes going off right now. But tell us about this. He predicted this. When did he predict this?
The first time was in 1948, and then again more recently, I think it's 2012. So it's the 2012 one in which, it's right there. And along with that,
what did he say?
There's a lot of it.
What did he say would happen?
He listed that it's another place where the volcanic activity is going to be highly destructive. And they listed in the earliest ones, they list different countries, like Japan and different places where Italy and what have you, where there's going to be severe volcanic activity. One that I didn't list when I sent information in, there is something called the Eiffel Fields in Germany, which will turn into a sea of fire. There's no date given on that. They stopped giving dates, but they gave certain markers. If we get to the stuff about Italy, you're going to find that very fascinating. That's mind-boggling.
So he said that this was going to happen in Iceland specifically?
One of the places, it was listed as one of the places they were going to have these eruptions. Yeah, and simply.
Yeah. So we saw that. Okay, here's another one. Details about Mars, the black holes, 1976 through 1988. Can you talk about Mars and black holes? And when did he predict this, and when was it discovered?
Well, okay, I'm not looking at all my documentation here, but 1976, he starts to publish information when he's meeting with his third contact person, a woman named Semyaze. And she's explaining to him that, because he's asking about life on Mars, and she says, there's no life on Mars as your scientists perceive it, but there is a microbial, floric and faunic form of life on Mars that will be discovered. That the environment, though, on Mars is hostile to life, and I'm giving these for a certain reason. And then she goes into, as do several other of the Mars ones, the water on Mars, that the fact that there's far more than is known, where it's located on Mars, which direction it's flowing in, et cetera, et cetera. So it turns out that in, I think, let's see, the corroboration on the Mars, it wasn't until 1987 on that they start to corroborate information about Mars. Mars does have, as was discovered, I think, during this century, it does have small floric and faunic life forms that are not yet considered by us, life, like people are thinking, oh, there's people on Mars or what have you. No. And it has something called perchlorate in the soil, which is a toxic substance which is hostile to life. That's on Mars. The other information, I have 3 pages of this, and we'll get to the black hole part of this too, because I could just lump it in and say all the documentation that people can see, and there's tons more on the website on black holes. Meier verifiably published that for official discovery. Now, I brought 3 pages of this information to a man named Ken Herkenhoff at the USGS in Flagstaff, Arizona, October of 2020, I believe it was. I gave him these 3 pages and I said, tell me what you think. He's a very, very nice guy, by the way. Gets back to me saying, could this guy be making lucky guesses? I said, I don't think so, Ken. I've got 3 pages of stuff about Mars. You didn't know anything about it. He said, well, what about lightning on Mars? I've never heard about that, because Meier published about lightning on Mars back in 80 or 82 or so. So Ken Herkenhoff couldn't find it, but NASA put it up in 2009.
So they discovered lightning 20 years later after he published
yes.
it. Wow.
Yes. It goes on and on like this. And with black holes, they're still discovering information that we have verifiably published before these discoveries.
That's unbelievable. Now, there's a couple of other ones here. I want you to talk about, you have a ton of them. I mean, I asked you I said, just send me like 5 or 6. You have 4 pages of these. So I'm pulling out just a few here. And if there's any that you think are mind-blowing, I mean, beyond the ones we've already talked about, predicting the Kennedy's assassinations and all that, you please tell me. I'll give you a chance to just give me 1 or 2 that you think that we did. But let's talk about Switzerland. So Switzerland giving up its neutrality. This was predicted. When did he predict this? And when did this happen?
1987. And they gave up their neutrality. It's either 2022 or just earlier this year, 2023. And it was stated in that document that they were going to allow cooperation between the UN and NATO and Switzerland, and that would be a violation of their neutrality. And this was one of the last things stated in the 1987 document. And when I saw that Switzerland is allowing UN and NATO, I go, oh my gosh, why? Because that's in the document in which the predictions for the destruction of the WTC are, in the predictions for the Russians moving their troops to Arkhangelsk in preparation for their attacks on Scandinavia and the attack against the US. So this...
Wait a minute, hold on. So this document from 1986, the Meier predictions from 1987, and he talks about Switzerland giving up its neutrality, and he says that's going to happen, and they just did. Among the documents in that predictions, which we're going to talk about some of these predictions in a moment, which maybe it's a good segue, but there will be a conflict, Russia attacking the United States, Russia moving its forces, and a whole and the World Trade Center bombings, right?
Yes. And just so people understand, Russia in this document is predicted to move its troops to a place in, I believe it's northern Siberia, called Arkhangelsk. That had not happened in 2002 when we have the first English transcript of this. In 2011, there was a news article and it said that Russia had just moved troops to Arkhangelsk. I sent this to a man I'd known for 50 years, a physician, retired physician, physicist, skeptic, told me I was nuts to be into this. He said, bring your camera, I want to talk about this. Basically gave he says, I'm sorry, but this man is not crazy. He's all this. He describes the perfect launching platform for what Russia could and would do. He says, I know that personally. I was in the service and I flew over that area. It's under year-round cloud cover, and that's the perfect staging area, certainly for attacking Scandinavia or for coming through Canada and Alaska, as Billy Meier predicts they will in attacking the US. That's all in this document from 1987. And my friend, Dr. Weinstein, gave us his testimonial after calling the guy a lunatic.
Well, it's in there. And I mean, God, we knock on wood that it doesn't happen, right? The whole hope is that maybe we get our act together and these things don't happen, right? I think that's the point of these prophecies, is that these things do not come to pass. I mean, I hope that that's the reason for them. But many of these things do, because we're not paying attention to it and people are ignoring it. Okay, so did I miss any? There's a whole bunch more we could talk about.
Yeah.
We could talk about the prediction of the Mars
Odyssey.
Yeah, what's the Mars Odyssey one? 1987? In this same document?
No, this is in another document from 87 where Meier is being given information about Mars and black holes and stuff. And the man, I think his name is Quetzal, in this document tells Billy that in 2001, there will be a launch of a project called the Mars Odyssey. He tells him that in 2000, that it'll be launched in 2001, and he tells him that in 1987. And the Mars Odyssey, which he names here, was launched then. Meier was also in another book. We have this, I think it's published in 78. He was told that there would be a comet discovered in the future, and that scientists would name it Toutatis, Touttatis. That's in a German book. It was discovered, and it was named Toutatis. This kind of stuff, they stopped giving certain specifics past that point, but they gave the information about events, like you're saying, that we'd like to avoid if possible. They were the first to warn about two coming civil wars in the US in the 87 document, and in one before that in a book in 1981. And I laughed at that when I read it in 86. I thought that was crazy. There's not going to be any more civil wars in
Right.
America.
Yeah, now here we are on the precipice of a civil war. All right, so let's get into some of the predictions now. So those are other. Before I go, is there any other big ones? I mean, I know there's a lot, but is there any other big ones that stand out to you that is just like jaw dropping that you would want to share with our audience?
Certainly, in this 87 document, that we can absolutely, prove. I think we're maybe coming to it: the destruction of humankind by AI, the danger of AI. Yeah.
Artificial intelligence, he gets this prediction from Contact in 1987, publishes that AI is going to lead to our destruction.
Computer-controlled weapons. He also mentions cloned human fighting machines. So this is 1987. We don't know anything about AI. And the computer-controlled weapons turn against humankind, and it's going to be we could see it now if we had half a brain. No, but, the cat's out of the bag, and all the techno heads who can't just wait to merge with machines. They haven't become human beings yet, but they want to merge with machines. So we can just watch these things. We are posting all the time the updates on which volcano is erupted, which new correlation or corroboration of Meier's info. All of this talk about evil alien threat, which we know is bogus because no advanced space traveling enemy is going to wait 70 years until you've got some kind of weaponry, nuclear and all the rest of it, to attack if that was its intention. But we're told that there's this evil alien threat. However, in 2015, in a video with English subtitles, and some of it Meier tells in English, before this Tic Tac video ever comes up, Meier explains what these other UFO sightings, majority of sightings have been from secret military craft since after World War II, but a warning that under certain circumstances, should this war erupt, Meier explained it in 2015. The Tic Tac video is a joke when you look at Billy Meier's videos and his films, and you realize that you're just having the wool pulled over your eyes by the intelligence community and all of the people who aid and abet them in so-called ufology, who don't have one piece of evidence between or amongst themselves.
That's unbelievable. Okay, so
don't believe anything. We'll find out.
I guess we will. Let's talk about okay, the eruptions of well, we already talked about this, eruptions of Italian and other volcanoes. So we're seeing this one now. But you meant the
But that's
Italian.
something. Yeah, the Italian thing. This is very interesting because going back to 1948, Billy Meier's first contact person, this elderly man named Svath, so we're told, specifically foretells that between 2015 and 2017 in central Italy, there will be a series of powerful earthquakes that will be the precursors to the eruptions of, I think it's 5 major volcanoes in Italy. And those will be happening afterwards. Now, I went online, and I have the documentation on the blog, went online and I started to check. I found the news articles that the 2016, I think it was, date, Central Italy volcanic eruptions were the strongest on record. And then subsequent to that, these 5 volcanoes, what do we have? Vesuvius, Mount Etna, Mount Marsili, Campi Flegrei, and Stromboli. They've all become active.
That's 4 more than I could have named, so you're doing well.
Well, I see it all the time, because what's going to happen, according to this information, Campi Flegrei is a caldera, and that when that goes, parts of Italy will be going into the sea. It's become active in the last month.
And when did he predict this?
Starting in 1948.
So, and it's amazing to think about the timeline to us as human beings, right? We think like that's such a long time, but when we think about space time and we think about this timeline, it's a blink of an eye for these predictions and right? I mean, am I getting that right?
It's a blink of an eye. And, you have just come to the place where you're asking even why and what we can do about this. Because, see, in all of so-called ufology, and I like ufology rather than UAP, that's a distraction for phenomena. Nobody in ufology ever asks if the contacts are real. Let's say Meier's contact. What's the reason for it? It isn't so that we can chase lights in the sky and pretend to be experts on things that none of us can be experts on. We really can't. I can be an expert. George Norris says I'm the world's leading authority in UFOs. Well, I'm the only person representing a real case with real information, real evidence, and real importance. The rest of this you can't do anything with. So go, okay, so what do you take away from any of this Senate hearings and all the dog and pony shows? You take away nothing. You take away something when you look at this higher standard of proof, which isn't the final standard of proof. That's in the advice column, if you will. But the reason is to help us assure our future survival. These people are not coming down. They're not going to land. They're not coming here to save us. They're not coming here to harm us. They are coming here to say, look, rule number 1 in this universe, you're 100% responsible for your own life. And you collectively as a humankind are responsible for your life here. And this blink of an eye you talked about in cosmic time, if we make it through this period or we don't, it's not the biggest thing to happen in the universe. It's just the biggest thing that either does or doesn't happen for us. There's a lot about that. We may not be going into all that right now. Right. But this is deep information.
So Italy volcanoes, he predicts this back in the 1940s. He gets this message about, and now it's active.
And there's more. Because subsequent to that in the 70s, he was told that when Vesuvius erupts, it's going to take out the Vatican. And the skeptics jumped on that and they said, what an idiot. We all know that, Vesuvius, that's near Naples and the Vatican's over here in Rome.
Rome, right. Yeah.
Right? Within the last 10 years, scientists discovered that the magma chambers for Vesuvius extend all the way under Rome.
Oh my
The magma chambers are right under there. And then there was venting taking place at the Rome airport where I think this is in the last 4 or 5 years, where people were noticing steam coming up at the airport. People, maybe we want to stop chasing lights in the sky and get down to taking care of ourselves and finding out how to survive.
I hope we get all of the secret stuff out of the Vatican dungeons and caves. Better make some moves on that right now. That's unbelievable. I mean, or move out of Italy. Move out of Italy right now, for crying out loud. Okay, that's a major. So we'll see. I mean, here we're documenting it right here. It's already been documented on the Billy side. We're documenting it again here on this show. We'll see. We'll see. Let's also talk about two coming U.S. civil wars. Now, when did Billy, what specifically did Billy learn during a contact session about U.S. civil wars? When was that, and what did they say?
In 1981 and in 1987, I may have touched on that, this document called the Henoch prophecies. Henoch is the German word for Enoch. Enoch, the prophet Enoch, just like Elijah, Isaiah, Jeremiah, and a couple others, was a contactee for these people as well. And they were shown, some of these people also were time traveled, if you would, they could show them that, and at those times, of course, there was no United States of America and countries named Russia. Enoch really is about 10,000 years ago. But in those prophecies from him, it was stated in future times, the United States of America will have two terrible civil wars, one following upon the other, and it can't be helped that the country will break up into 4 or 5 territories. As I said, I read that in 1986. I was in an apartment on Westwood Boulevard in Los Angeles with a guy named Randy Winters, who used to speak about this material. He was a very great speaker about it. And I laughed and I said to Randy, I said, what is this Swiss guy smoking? What do you mean civil wars in America? He says, well, Billy, he's been pretty right about everything. I said, well, I don't see civil war. I was laughing, and I'm not laughing now, and a lot of people aren't. And so even Alex Jones, you've been scooped long ago, Alex, and it's great. I mean, if people are speaking up for the purpose of waking people up, not to promote fear and partisanship. This is what's destroying us here in the country, partisanship and belief systems. And there's another thing, it's not going to be popular to say it, at the root of all of this, it's overpopulated. We didn't moderate our population in the world because we live on something that's round. You can think of it even like if you have an aquarium or a cup or something in which you put organisms, it supports a certain number. Past that point, it overloads the natural process that the planet or the thing has been made to handle. And of course, people get very upset when you say that, and I understand it, but people can find out and determine the truth for themselves through reasoning and thinking, not through believing or disbelieving things.
All right, another couple of ones here. Let's wrap it up with a few here, Michael. Okay, this one I've been talking about on my show for a couple of years now, which is the collapse of the U.S. dollar and a cashless society. And just look around you. We've been really talking about it over the past year to 2 years on our show a lot about central bank digital currencies, getting rid of the U.S. dollar. That's fine. I've been doing it for 2 years. How long has Billy been doing it? How long has he been predicting this?
Well, let's go back to 1958 when Billy predicted a whole bunch of very interesting things, and a huge number have come to pass. And in those predictions, he predicted the coming of the EU, and that every human being on Earth, with the efforts, if you will, of the US and the EU, would be biochipped and totally controlled through a central data bank. If you are doing that, that was the precursor. And Meier, in that same document, forewarns about plastic, well, or announces, predicts plastic credit cards, portable cell phones, the interconnection of computers worldwide linked. I think we call that the internet these days. And he says that people will also succumb to being tricked visually and in other ways by what they see, which I think we call deep fake these days. It isn't later until 2006. I'm in Switzerland, I think it's 2005 when I actually was there. And I asked Billy, was the Iraq war fundamentally about oil? No, he sticks his finger in the air. Fundamentally, it's about your dollar, because if things go a certain way, you may as well roll cigarettes with your paper money. In 2017, he puts out a very long series of predictions that are, some of which are extremely uncomfortable, but he does speak about the fact that there will be a worldwide, worldwide financial collapse, that many of the elite will be living a high life at that time, while the peoples of the world, and he then specifies, the American people will be dispossessed, and the government will turn the military and police against the partly heavily armed populace. In that document, he then goes on and talks about, the cashless society. They spoke, I think, I'm not sure now if it's 2012 or when, but they said Bitcoin, and that is not going to be the answer. To me, it's fairly obvious that when the government decides to take control, or the worldwide networking of forces, they can control what is and isn't legal tender, etc. So
Wow,
you have this
crash of crypto, you have biochipping, you have the collapse of the U.S. dollar and a cashless society, all within that same document from what year was that? 19.
It's in two documents. The 1958 document, and then in 2012 or maybe another little later, 2020. So some of these things, listen, there are other people that have predicted some of these things. There's nobody that's predicted well over 250 error-free examples so far. Some of these things that haven't happened yet, well, they were predicted still relatively long ago, 1940s, 1950s.
Yeah, we have a couple more. I'm just going to rattle these off here.
Sure.
And you can read, and by the way, you can read many, many more on Michael's website at theyflyblog.com. We'll have it linked up in this. So we're just highlighting a few of them here. Russian attack on the UK, thousands overthrowing the U.S. government, the destruction of Israel and other countries in the Mideast. You mentioned the crash of crypto.
Crash of the dollar, too.
An asteroid. Oh, I want to hear about this real quick.
Yeah.
The Apophis asteroid in 2029 or 2036. What does that mean?
Yeah.
Or 2029 or 2036, an asteroid is going to do what?
In 1981, and we illustrated this in a comic book. We illustrated a couple of Billy's important, contexts so people could see it and read it, and maybe it'll go in. He, in 1981, and then again a couple of years later, further elaborated on the coming of an object that he and the Pleiadian people referred to as the red meteor, that our scientists would then call asteroid Apophis. And as people can read and or see illustrated in 6 languages, this is an object coming from the depths of outer space that is on a collision course with Earth, either on 2029. If it misses, it comes back 2036 and hits. The Pleiadian people are not allowed to mess with this, if we may use that word, but they specifically state in this information, your scientists worldwide need to come together to deflect, not blow up, but deflect this object. Because if you try to blow it up, it's going to rain down on your planet. That's not a good idea. What's the best way to do it? The detonation of an atomic charge from a missile within a certain vicinity that your scientists can figure out enough of a shock wave to go, because that little is going to go in terms of the actual distance by which it'll miss your world. Now, after we publish that information, and I first got the information to publish on this, I think it was in the 2000s, but it's in the 1981 information. I don't know if I ever noticed it before. The Russians then called for an international effort to deflect Apophis. The Chinese, I think, signed on to that. The European Space Agency was invited. NASA poo-pooed the whole thing, and then NASA had to go and change a size estimate. We have all this. They changed the size estimate of this object based on their abilities to see this thing to within, I think it's 25 meters of what Meier was given.
Wow.
1981.
Whoa. So Meier was given the size of this object
Yes.
and when it's going to hit, and then they discover it years
And
later.
where.
And where? Holy
And
shit!
that is, and of course, that's going to, according to this information. And again, ladies and gentlemen, people, make of it what you will. NASA has continuously tried to, poo-poo the whole thing. The Pleiadians have said, if this strikes on either of those dates, it will strike between the North Sea and the Black Sea. It will rip the surface of the earth open there. There will be, of course, tidal waves and floods and what have you, and gases that will be released, the atmospheric consequences, the nuclear power plants that are on various fault lines and seashores, and the cause and effect of this whole thing would be massive. And so far, there's been no real action. Now, NASA recently, I think, was talking about solar sails or this, that, which the Plejaren also had said, don't bother with that. You need to deflect it. Now, the problem is, if I recall correctly, and I may not, that the US is not allowed to put any nuclear weapons in space, but that Russia is not under that limitation. And cooperation rather than, insane war just for the illusion of being able to rule a cinder block here, it'd be wise for our leaders to heed this information and go ahead and, if you can, try to discredit. Don't try to keep killing the man. Don't do that. Just discredit his information, because every time all these assassination attempts tell you, hey, this guy is the real deal. He's a threat. And without saying too much, I can tell you right now that I know for a fact that their property in Switzerland is under regular military, we'll call it monitoring for a polite term, and presence, because they are trying to intercept the messages from the meetings that Meier has with these people, which they can't do. And it's not, listen, this isn't like I'm a UFO contactee. This is a thankless gig for the most part. Each time a major prophet came forward in our history, they were not welcomed. They were nailed up or hacked to pieces or whatever.
Right.
So we're being warned that we, the people of Earth, heed that first, law of the universe. If you want, you're responsible for your life, for your planet, for yourselves.
Well, I mean, this is a great example of an opportunity that if we have this prediction, this is going to happen in this year, and the humans of Earth need to come together and work together cooperatively to do this thing to prevent our extinction. Like, that to me is a clear-cut example of how to use these prophecies and predictions, right? Maybe the volcanoes is a little bit more difficult. I guess it's a warning that, well, you maybe don't want to don't build your house there, right? That's one thing. What about a war with Russia? Well, maybe that should be a warning to NATO to not build your new 15 military bases in Finland right on the doorstep of Russia, and maybe you back off with your aggression, and maybe we learn something from that. I don't know, so we don't kill ourselves.
Well, you're on it, and I have to tell you that in that 87 document, it's clear that it says Russia will attack Scandinavia. They will leave Denmark out of the equation because they say it's not important for the whole thing, but they're going to attack Sweden, Norway, and Finland. And when I read that even a few years ago, I thought, well, why? Those are countries it's neutrality. They're not
NATO.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, and now they are. And it's like, if we can't get this, well, there are immutable universal laws. Cause and effect is one of them. And in 2017, in another document where Meier talks about the cashless thing and the fact that there will be attempts at whole genocides by certain elites, will be, because it wasn't Bill Gates and Fauci who started the COVID. That goes back to a president named Richard Nixon and Mao Zedong taking some genetic material. That's a whole other story. A lot of the people in the audience don't even know who Richard Nixon was. That's fine. In the 2017 document, Meier says that the US will attack Russia from a base in Germany. Within 1 year, America announced the movement of troops to a base in Germany within proximity of Russia. The handwriting is more than on the wall. Don't we want to wake up? And I want to throw one other thought in for you, because you had a very interesting conversation with your friend Tucker, and he talked about a dark element connected to UFOs. Friends, there's no dark element from anybody off-world at this point,
us.
certainly.
Yeah.
It's us.
And that's
the dark
a lot of
element.
people. A lot of people were asking, like Clayton and Tucker, can you guys elaborate on that? And that I've elaborated here on the show multiple times. So I've already talked about it. I've had interviews with former U.S. Marines who've talked about the dark element, the dark human trafficking, humans involved in organ trafficking and human trafficking, and using these advanced technologies to carry it out. So it is the human element that is the darkest part of this.
Predicted in 1958 in that document by Meier, the human trafficking, the exploitation and trafficking of children and women. This is all there as warnings. He even talks about prostitution will be legalized and taxed. That's already gone on in some places since 1958. It's
Wow.
in
Yeah.
the 20th, 21st. I mean, honestly, there are hundreds of these things.
Well, I want our we could go on all night, and I could, but I want our audience to go to your website and read through them. You know, if you're now curious about it, go and start to read the reports. Go look at the original documentation and make your own determinations about it. Michael, I'll get you out of here on this. Final thought about like 2024 in our immediate future. Is there anything in the Meier documents that looks to like the 2024 election with Joe Biden, Donald Trump? Anything in our immediate future that we can talk about as a major prediction in the next year or 2 years?
There has been nothing specific about our coming prediction. Some of the things that Meier is now saying are a little cryptic, but very little. I mean, because he's warning, we can now look, the way I interpret it, we are going to pursue a very dead-end war with Russia for no reason. They never attacked us. China is an ally of theirs. In 1976, Meier first warned in another document, we have that in the book, warning the West that, I think he said, was it the wolf and the dragon prepare a bitter end for you? And he talks about how we don't know, but behind the scenes, as far back as then, parties were coming together in those countries, recognizing the coming threat from the U.S., which endlessly wants to invade everybody. I would say that it isn't necessarily that we know that a specific event will happen, but there's so many things in flux and play. People crazy playing with AI now. The Alzheimer leader in chief of our country, crazy leaders in other countries. We've been given the warnings, but we are also told there is something else. And that is by 2029, if we hit 10 billion people on the planet, it triggers an unstoppable progression towards an extinction event. And we've been warned about this since the 40s. People don't have to buy it or anything else. You don't have to buy anything. As a matter of fact, something crazy just popped in my mind. I'll give away, for the first 25 people that come from and say I saw you in Clayton, I'm going to give away a free download of one of our earliest films on the Meier case that just went live on Amazon. I think it's probably about the best UFO film ever made, and I've made two other ones subsequent to it, but it's called The Silent Revolution of Truth. And if people write me without any obligation, first 25 people, I'll send them a free download so they can read it, watch it, pardon me, read the stuff on the blog and all, challenge, send questions. But it's not about me, certainly. It's not about Billy. He's the real messenger. He's just doing his gig. He says, it's my duty. Well, the first time I ever met, I have to say this, I come up to his house there in Switzerland with a friend of mine from Texas, this gregarious guy. Billy just happens to come through the door. And my friend Mark says, Billy, I want to thank you on behalf of all humankind. And Billy says, he knew who he was. He said, don't mention it, Mark. It's my duty. Thank you. And off he went. And that stuck with me. The man does his job, no matter what.
Well, you've been a great messenger for this work. And again, not trying to convince any skeptics out there. I want to present this information. You can go and do the research yourself. You can see when it was published. You can see when it was published in physical format in books, bound in leather-backed books, and also on the website. You can see it all. You can watch the films. You can make up your own mind about it. It's remarkable. And it deserves a platform to be heard. And you can say it's nonsense, great. You can say, wow, this is life-changing, and you can start to do more research on it. So for the first 25 people, Michael, if they email you and you say they saw Redacted, they saw you on Redacted, you'll give them a free download of this movie. Perfect. Okay,
Send them a link, and they get the free download.
Perfect.
So I thank you for the platform, and I know Billy thanks you as well.
Well, thank you, and give my best to Billy, and I'd love to meet him sometime. Michael, thank you so much. Thank you so much for this and these predictions and looking back. We really appreciate it, and hopefully a peaceful and prosperous 2024 and beyond. And hopefully people will pay attention to these predictions. Michael, thank you so much.
Thank you, Clayton.